Hello, I'm Nudrat Hopper. I'm a community organiser and a teacher. This is one of a series of conversations about GodSend, which is a resource to support people who are starting new Christian communities. These communities go under various names: church plants, fresh expressions of church, missional communities, and more. We call them new Christian communities. The topic, what it's about, is chapter 1 in the book. And I'm talking with Reverend Dr. Mike Moynagh from Oxford. He's the author of this book, GodSend, and he's been studying these new Christian communities and helping with them for over 20 years. Mike, what are these new Christian communities?
Well, Nudrat, let me give you a couple of examples. I'm thinking of Knit and Natter. It was started by Christine and 3 of her friends. And what they did was to create an opportunity for people to meet together and knit for a purpose. It was mainly women that gathered to knit prayer shawls for the bereaved, blankets for a local women's refuge, hats for shoebox appeals, and so on. About 30 people became involved. Most of them were not previously attending church. And at the end of each session, Christine would do a short spiritual devotional. And this little short talk became really popular. The women would start discussing it, and they'd start talking about Christian themes. And gradually, to cut a long story short, gradually they began to pray together, they learned to worship together, and the little Christian community, worshipping community, emerged there in the middle of this Knit and Natter. If I think of a different example, I'm thinking of the churches up in Bradford who came together to start a food bank. And people would come on Saturday morning, collect free food. And then one Saturday, the Christian volunteers said to the clients of the food bank, they said, we're going to be here on Saturday evenings. And we're going to eat together and hang out together, have fun together. We'll look at some stories that Jesus told. He's known as one of the world's greatest spiritual teachers. We'll look and see what we think about these stories. Come and join us if you'd like to. And so on the first evening, about 12 people came. And then after 9 months, I think there was something like 60 people gathering together for what became known as Saturday gathering. And these folks had all come, they'd have food, they'd eat, they'd share their lives together, they'd begin to discuss some stories from scripture, they'd learn to pray, they'd sing some Christian songs. And effectively, a little church emerged. In fact, after about 2 years or so, a Church of England bishop was invited to come, and he baptized and confirmed 18 people who had become Christians through this Saturday gathering. And what the leaders heard people saying is, this is our church. And so they went to the other churches in the town and they said, hey, we've got a bit of a problem here. We seem to have started a church. We didn't mean to, but that's what's happened. Do you mind? And the other church leader said, well, no, of course we don't mind. They don't come to our churches, so this is great. And so that was Saturday gathering. So what we're really talking about is not inviting people to church on Sunday. The gap between church and the world is too large for that. What we're saying is, let's take church to people where they are. Let's go to people who don't currently attend the church. Let's love them to bits. And then let's form church with them, if they want to, in their everyday lives.
Mike, so I hear what you're saying about practical love leading to the start of some of these. So how do they come into being? When do we know that a new Christian community is coming into being?
Well, Nudrat, they all emerge in lots of different ways because, everyone does this in their own form and it depends on the context. But what we've noticed is a little pattern that seems to be common to so many of these new Christian communities. A handful of Christians, perhaps more, they get together and they listen to God and they listen to their context. And they prayerfully ask, how can we love the people around us? Can we form a knitting group with them? Can we form a food bank? Shall we form a walking group or a group that's interested in photography or a film group or whatever it is? How can we find a practical way to love the people around us? And then as people come back to this activity of love, as people come back regularly, community forms. And in the context of that community, the Christians involved begin to share the gospel in a simple, appropriate way. And then those who get excited by what they hear and begin to follow Jesus, then they meet and they worship together. They don't come to church on Sunday to do that. They worship together and become a Christian community where they are in the midst of their everyday lives. They connect themselves to the wider church in one way or another, but they form their own as a worshiping community in their everyday lives. And then at their best, these new Christians go and repeat the process, but in their own way, and start a further Christian community. So it's a process of listening, loving, forming community, sharing Jesus. A new worshiping community connected to the wider church emerges, and then the new Christians go and do it again. Listen, love, community, share Jesus, church take shape, repeat the process.
That sounds like quite a lot. From your experience, Mike, is it difficult?
Well, actually, it's a lot easier than you might think. Because all around the country, churches, I think probably every church has at least one outreach activity. There's a coffee morning with people who don't go to church. There's a luncheon club for all the people who don't go to church. Maybe there's a bereavement group. Nearly every church has some form of outreach activity. And what's happened really is that they've traveled those first 3 stages of what I call the missional journey. At some stage, some Christians got together, they listened to God, they listened to their context, they did this very intuitively, they weren't really conscious of what they were doing, but they said, we know some people around us who'd love to meet for coffee on a Tuesday morning. And so they form this little coffee morning. This is our activity of love. People keep coming back, and so community forms. So they've already traveled that listen, love, community, those 3 stages of the journey. They've already done that. And what I want to say is it's really easy to go to the next stage and begin to share Jesus. All you need to do is to say to people who come to your coffee morning, your luncheon club, or whatever it is that you're doing, is to say to them, hey folks, what we want to do is to add a voluntary extra on at the end, a little spirituality zone, or some spiritual well-being, or a spiritual headspace, whatever you want to call it, or a soul moment, if you want. And whatever language works. They just say, we want to add this little spiritual extra at the end of our meetings. Don't feel you've got to stay behind. You will be here next week, whatever happens. But if you want to stay behind for 10 minutes, what we're going to do is we'll light a candle on the table, we'll gather around the table, we'll have, we'll play some Christian music, we'll read a passage from Scripture, a story from the Bible, spiritual writing. We'll have a few minutes of quietness, of headspace. You can pray to God as you understand God, or pray to a higher power, or have positive thoughts for people. And then at the end, we'll have just a short prayer, just 10 minutes of spiritual headspace, Christian music, spiritual reading, some quietness, some time for silent prayer if people want, and spoken prayer. And what you've done then, people gather around and they do this for 8 or 10 minutes, and you've begun then to share Jesus in a very simple way. It's entirely voluntary. It's extra to what they're doing, but it's so easy. And what I want to say is anyone can do that. It's such a simple thing to do. So if you've got an outreach activity in your church, think, can we add a little spiritual zone on at the end, a little spirituality extra at the end of what we're doing?
Well, you can find out more in chapter 1 of GodSend, which is available on Amazon, and there is more content on the website. Next time, join us to find out why you might want to start one of these new Christian communities. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Nudrat.